Orthanc is one of the most iconic structures in Middle-earth, but have you ever wondered what lies inside its dark exterior? While canon and visual adaptations of The Lord of the Rings give us a basic grasp of what the Orthanc hid within its dark walls, much is still left to mystery. Few have walked these halls and lived to tell the tale, but through careful study of the chronicles and the accounts of those who witnessed its wonders and horrors, we will do our best to reconstruct Saruman's impregnable stronghold. So join us by the fire as we enter the Black Tower of Orthanc, peeling back the mysteries of its interior chambers and hidden secrets. Chapter 1. Architecture and Design. Let's start with the architecture and design of the tower. Rising 500 feet from the heart of Isengard, Orthanc stands as one of the most remarkable architectural achievements of the Second Age. The tower was a single monolithic structure hewn from one enormous formation of rock by the Dunedain of Gondor. Imagine the skill required to carve an entire fortress from a single geological feature, shaping it with such precision that no weapons or magic could break its walls. The tower's unique design consists of 4 massive stone piers fused into one unified structure, each pier rising independently before joining near the summit. These piers don't simply merge into a single mass. Instead, they open into 4 sharp pinnacles, gaping horns that rise like jagged spires at each corner. Between these horns lies a narrow platform of polished stone, etched with strange runes whose meaning has been lost to time. This is the same platform where Gandalf was held captive by Saruman, and where he eventually was saved by Gwaihir. The stone itself is described as black as midnight, yet gleaming as wet. The surface bears no tool marks, no signs of construction joints or building phases. It's as if the entire tower was shaped by will and craft, so refined that the boundary between natural formation and artificial construction simply ceased to exist. Internally, the tower's design follows principles that speak to both defensive necessity and architectural ambition. A single stairway winds from the base to the pinnacle, carved directly into the stone of the central mass. Gandalf's own account speaks of a narrow stair of many thousand steps, giving us a sense of the tremendous vertical journey required to reach the tower's summit. The 4 great piers that form the tower's structure each served specific purposes, though their exact functions evolved over the centuries. Some scholars speculate that each pier contained separate vertical passages or shafts, creating multiple circulation routes within the tower. This would align with Númenórean principles of fortress design, where redundancy and complexity were built into every defensive structure. Chapter 2. The Foundation and Lower Chambers. We begin our journey inside Orthanc at its most carefully guarded point, the single entrance that controls all access to the tower's mysteries. This door is reached by climbing 27 stone steps from ground level. By elevating the entrance, the builders ensured that no battering ram could be brought to bear against the portal, while the steps themselves could become a killing ground for defenders raining arrows from the narrow windows above. The door itself was secured by the Key of Orthanc, a unique artifact that only the tower's master could possess. When Gandalf and King Theoden approached after the Battle of Isengard, they found this portal locked against them, a testament to the security measures that protected the tower's interior even in its master's moment of greatest vulnerability. Beyond this fortified entrance lies a vestibule that served multiple purposes throughout Orthanc's long history. In the days when Gondorian wardens occupied the tower, this space would have functioned as a guard post, the first line of defense against any who sought to penetrate deeper into the tower. The chamber's design allows defenders to observe and challenge visitors before granting them access to the inner reaches of the fortress. Adjacent to this entrance hall, we can reconstruct the presence of essential military facilities. We can imagine a Gondorian guard room that would have housed the small garrison that maintained Orthanc during the centuries of Gondorian control. These soldiers, handpicked for their loyalty and skill, would have lived within the tower itself, creating a need for barrack-style quarters that could accommodate a dozen or more warriors in conditions befitting their important duty. The lower levels would have likely also contained an armory where weapons and armor could be stored in quantities sufficient to equip additional defenders should the need arise. These practical military spaces in the lower levels were probably later converted to great extent by Saruman's more sinister purposes. In Peter Jackson's Return of the King, we see the great pantry outside the Orthanc, where Merry and Pippin find their way, Guided by a whole rotisserie chicken, it is still likely that some sort of kitchen and storage area for food and beverages also existed within the Orthanc itself, probably in the lower levels of the tower. The lower levels held secrets beyond mere military and practical necessity. When King Elisar's companions searched the tower after the War of the Ring, they discovered hidden compartments that Saruman had used to store his most precious and terrible acquisitions. Behind walls that appeared solid but yielded to those who knew the proper techniques, they found artifacts of immense historical significance. One of the greatest of these discoveries included the Elendel Mere, the Star of Elendel that had been lost when Isildur fell at the Gladden Fields, and that was found by Gimli. Alongside it lay a golden case that had once held the One Ring itself, relics that Saruman had somehow recovered from Isildur's remains. These findings suggest that the tower's lower levels contained multiple hidden vaults, spaces designed to safeguard treasures and secrets from even the most thorough search. The lower chambers also contained evidence of Saruman's trafficking with Wormtongue, including jewels and heirlooms of the House of Yule that had been systematically looted from Edoras. The presence of these items reveals how Orthanc served not just as a fortress and residence, but as a storehouse for the wealth that funded Saruman's growing ambitions of evil. The foundation levels speak to the tower's evolution from noble stronghold to corrupt center of power. Where once Gondorian soldiers had maintained vigilant watch over the northern approaches to their realm, later servants of a darker master plotted the downfall of kingdoms and the enslavement of free peoples. Yet the stone remembers its original purpose, and even in corruption, Orthanc retained the fundamental strength and security that made it impregnable to all earthly assault. Chapter 3: Libraries, Workshops, and Dark Arts. Ascending from the practical necessities of the lower levels, we enter the chambers where Saruman's true nature revealed itself, spaces dedicated to knowledge, craft, and ultimately, the perversion of both. The most extensive of these chambers would undoubtedly have been Saruman's library and study, a collection of wisdom that began with noble purpose and grew into something far more sinister. As head of the White Council and keeper of Isengard, Saruman initially gathered texts and scrolls for the highest of purposes, the preservation of knowledge and the defense of Middle-earth against the return of the Shadow. His collection would have included histories of the Elder Days, treatises on the nature of the Rings of Power, star charts inherited from the Númenórean astronomers who once watched the heavens from Orthanc's Pinnacle. The library's evolution mirrors Saruman's own corruption, where once the shelves held copies of the wisdom preserved in Rivendell and the chronicles of Gondor's glory, gradually darker texts found their way into the collection. But knowledge without application remained merely academic exercise, and Saruman's workshops represented the practical expression of his accumulated learning. These chambers, converted from spaces that had once served as quarters for Gondorian soldiers and officers, became laboratories where theory transformed into terrible reality. One of the most infamous products of these workshops was the blasting powder that breached the walls of Helm's Deep, the mysterious fire of Orthanc that demonstrated Saruman's growing mastery over destructive forces. The creation of such substances required sophisticated apparatus, alembics for distillation, furnaces capable of precise temperature control, and measuring devices accurate enough to handle volatile reagents. More disturbing was the evidence of Saruman's experiments in the manipulation of life itself. While the great breeding pits that produced his Uruk-hai lay in the caverns beneath Isengard's ring, the theoretical work that made such abominations possible was conducted within Orthanc itself. The atmosphere in these chambers would have been thick with preservative vapors and the underlying smell of corruption that no amount of ventilation could entirely dispel. Chapter 4: The Palantir Chamber and Observatory. At the apex of Orthanca's interior spaces, we encounter the chamber that became the true center of Saruman's power and the instrument of his ultimate downfall, the room that housed the Palantir of Orthanc. This space represents both the architectural and spiritual culmination of everything below it, a place where the accumulated energies of the entire structure focused into a single point of terrible possibility. Peter Jackson's visual interpretation does a great job of capturing the cold, sterile, and sinister ambience that would have lingered in this chamber. At the center of this remarkable chamber stood the Palantir itself, mounted on a pedestal that seemed to have grown from the floor rather than being placed there by human hands. The seeing stone appeared deceptively simple, a perfect sphere of dark crystal about the size of a man's head, smooth and featureless to casual observation. But to look closely was to risk being drawn into depths that seemed to extend far beyond the stone's physical boundaries. The windows of this chamber were unlike any others in Orthanc. Instead of the narrow defensive slits found in the lower levels or even the tall ceremonial windows of the middle floors, these openings were broader and offered better views across the entire landscape. Essentially, they served as lenses, crafted from materials that could magnify and clarify distant objects until events occurring leagues away could be observed as clearly as if they were happening just outside. The psychological effect of this chamber was as important as its technical capabilities. Standing in this space, surrounded by the tools of cosmic observation and manipulation, it was easy for Saruman to believe that he had transcended the limitations that bound lesser beings. The chamber became a place where perspective shifted dangerously, where the ordinary concerns of ground-dwelling creatures seemed small and manageable, where the temptation to see oneself as above and apart from the rest of creation became almost overwhelming. It was in this chamber that Saruman's corruption reached its completion. Surrounded by the instruments of his astronomical studies, and connected through the Palantir to powers beyond Middle-earth, he lost sight of the wisdom that should have guided his actions. The chamber that should have been a place of learning and wonder became instead the command center for schemes that threatened the freedom of all peoples. Chapter 5. The Pinnacle. Above everything else, at the very crown of Orthanc, lies the most exposed and yet most symbolic space in the entire tower, the open-air pinnacle that serves as both observatory and throne of the sky. This platform, accessible by a flight of thousands of stairs and suspended between the four sharp horns that crown the tower, represents the ultimate expression of Orthanc's dual nature. The pinnacle's true significance lies in its function as the ultimate expression of power and ambition. To stand at this height, 500 feet above the surrounding landscape, is to experience a profound shift in perspective that goes far beyond mere elevation. From this vantage point, the concerns of earthbound creatures seem diminished, their struggles reduced to the movements of insects across a vast landscape. The psychological effect of this elevation cannot be overstated. It is a dangerous place for any being possessed of power and ambition. When Saruman climbed to this pinnacle for his nightly observations, he was not only studying the stars but reinforcing his growing conviction that he stood apart from and above the ordinary world. The platform became a place of meditation on power, where the White Wizard could contemplate his place in the cosmic order and gradually convince himself that his wisdom and strength entitled him to reshape Middle-earth according to his vision. The pinnacle gained its most sinister significance when Saruman used it as a prison for Gandalf. After the Grey Wizard refused to join his schemes, Saruman had him dragged to this highest point and abandoned there, marooned between sky and earth with no possibility of escape. The platform that had served as a place of contemplation and observation became a torture chamber, where exposure to the elements and the psychological pressure of helpless isolation were intended to break the will of one of the wisest beings in Middle-earth. Gandalf's imprisonment on the pinnacle reveals the platform's true nature as both sanctuary and trap. The same features that made it ideal for observation and meditation, its elevation, its exposure, its isolation from the world below, also made it a perfect prison for any being dependent on physical access routes. The narrow stair that led to the platform could be easily blocked, turning the summit into an island in the sky from which there was no escape except by flight. The rescue of Gandalf by Gwaihir the Great Eagle marked a turning point, not just in the immediate crisis, but in the symbolic significance of the pinnacle itself. The arrival of the King of Birds at this highest point represented the intervention of forces that transcended Saruman's growing power, a reminder that there were authorities in Middle-earth that could not be corrupted or controlled by earthly ambition. Chapter 6. Orthanc's Enduring Mysteries. As our journey through Orthanc's interior draws to a close, we must acknowledge that many of the tower's deepest secrets remain hidden. Despite the careful searches conducted after the War of the Ring, despite the accounts of those who witnessed Saruman's fall and the subsequent cleansing of Isengard, the Black Tower continues to guard mysteries that may never be fully revealed. While the major chambers and workshops have been identified and explored, the discovery of hidden compartments and secret passages suggests that others remain concealed behind walls that appear solid, but may yield to the proper words or techniques. Future ages may uncover caches of artifacts or documents that shed new light on both Saruman's activities and the tower's original construction. The materials used in Orthanc's construction continue to defy complete analysis. The black stone's resistance to both damage and aging represent Númenórean craftsmanship at its peak, so competent that it is pushing the boundaries of physics. Perhaps, most intriguingly, there are suggestions in the surviving records that Orthanc was designed to be more than just a fortress or even a repository of knowledge. Some accounts hint that the tower was intended as a focus for power that went beyond the merely physical, a device for concentrating and directing forces that the Númenóreans understood, but that later ages have forgotten. The fate of Saruman's accumulated knowledge presents another ongoing mystery. While King Elisar's search recovered many important artifacts and documents, it seems unlikely that everything was found. Saruman was far too cunning to keep all his secrets in obvious locations, and there may be hidden archives containing information that could prove either beneficial or dangerous to future generations. Today, Orthanc stands once again under rightful authority, its chambers cleaned of corruption, and its purposes restored to their original noble intent. The workshops that once produced implements of war now stand for more peaceful purposes, while the libraries have been purged of their darkest contents. Yet the tower endures as a reminder that the potential for both creation and destruction lies within every application of knowledge and power. The chambers that once echoed with Saruman's voice now stand as monuments to the eternal struggle between the forces of light and darkness, serving as both museum and warning for future generations who must make their own choices about how to use the gifts they have been given. At this point, I would like to ask you, dear listener, what secrets do you think hid inside Orthanc? Let me know in the comments below. That concludes this episode. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into Saruman's tower. If you enjoyed this episode, you will most likely also enjoy our other deep dives into the dark places of Middle-earth as well, so be sure to check them out. Until next time, keep safe and stay by the fire.